Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Engage with Eagle Forum. I'm Tabitha Walter, the political director of Eagle Forum. During the last episode of Engage, you heard from Eagle Forum's Vice President, Kathy Adams, about how she dove right into an issue that she never thought in a million years she would handle. That was climate change. So we wanted to delve further into the issue, and I've asked one of the leading experts on free market environmentalism to join me to talk about some of the problems that we're facing today when it comes to this topic. So first of all, let me tell you a little bit about him. Myron Ebell is the director of Competitive Enterprise Institute's Center for Energy Environment, which is one of the most effective advocates for free market environmentalism. He also chairs the Cooler Heads Coalition, an ad hoc coalition of over 24 nonprofit groups that question global warming alarmism and oppose energy rationing policies. Myron led the Trump Presidential Transitions Agency Action Team for the Environmental Protection Agency in 2016 and January 2017. CEI and the Cooler Heads Coalition led the successful decade-long fight to defeat cap-and-trade legislation, and more recently led the effort to convince President Trump to withdraw from the Paris Climate Treaty. Yay! His involvement in the transition led to public protests and marches in several cities in America and in Europe. He has had multiple media appearances in various outlets, including C-SPAN and Fox News. You can find his writings in various print media, such as The Federalist, which is one of our favorites. Thank you for joining me today.
It's good to be with you, Tabitha.
So let's jump in on a problem that we're all facing today, which is the absurd gas prices. You know, a lot of us will go to the pumps and we see those little Biden stickers where it's pointing and it says, "I did this." Now, let's dive into the details of what he actually did. So what is the reason for the increase in gas prices recently?
Yes, well, I was recently in California, and there I saw the gas pumps with $6 plus per gallon. So maybe that's where we're all headed, is above 6 or even 7. Look, at the beginning of the Biden presidency and still during the shutdown, demand for gasoline had gone down, and therefore production had gone down and prices had gone down. So it was inevitable that as the economy came back and the shutdown was ended, that prices were going to go up somewhat. But President Biden has made his own distinctive contributions, because from day one, the day he was inaugurated, he said, we're going to get out of the climate, we're going to get back into the Paris Climate Treaty. We're going to suspend oil and gas leasing on federal land. We're going to cancel a lot of pipelines, or not approve pipelines. And essentially, he then told the oil and gas industry that we don't need you anymore, and coal as well, that by a date certain, 2030, 2035, it varies, we're going to be out of the business. You guys can go away because everybody will be driving electric vehicles. So this is, the oil and gas industry heard that, and they have, why would you invest in ramping up production if you've been told that you're not needed anymore and we're going to put you out of business? So that's where we get these high gas prices. The gas prices were going to go up, but they've gone up a lot because every single thing President Biden and his administration have done is designed to hamper oil production. The Russian invasion of Ukraine has made all this worse, but it just shows that when you're not prepared and when you're pursuing policies that are risky, if anything bad happens, if a crisis happens, the oil industry can't respond immediately to this crisis because it was so under pressure before the crisis. So now we're seeing no end to the increases.
Yeah, that's terrible. I keep seeing the prices tick up, and I'm a native West Virginian, so coal country all the way, but you have to drive 20, 30 minutes to get to the nearest grocery store. And so when these people go to the polls to vote, they're going to have that in mind, that they are pinching pennies in order just to drive to their work or to their church or wherever they want to go. So this is a really terrible situation that we're in right now.
Well, absolutely. Yeah. And I'm a rural Agro-American from the West. And, people have to have big rigs for their work. They have to drive long distances. It's not like a little short suburban commute in a medium-sized city. People have to have pickup trucks to haul the things that they work with. So, this is really, I think, hurting rural Americans more than anyone else.
Yeah, exactly. Now, I've heard that the US makes enough oil for us to be sustainable, but we are exporting our oil and importing foreign oil. So what's the story behind that?
Well, the United States became dependent upon foreign imports starting in 1957. And US production went down for a long time until the shale oil and gas revolution that started around 2007, 2008. So we were a net importer of several $100 billion of oil and finished products like gasoline and diesel for a number of years. But the shale revolution combined with the Trump deregulatory agenda made the United States self-sufficient in oil and natural gas starting in 2019. And if it weren't for the actions of the Biden administration, I believe we would still be self-sufficient in oil and natural gas. However, that does not mean that we don't export some products and crude oil and import others, because the places where it's produced in the United States, primarily, especially Texas and New Mexico and the Gulf offshore, means that that's not convenient for the refineries on the West Coast. So we export oil from the Gulf states, Louisiana, Texas, and import oil on the West Coast from other places. So, but the question is, are we self-sufficient or not? Are we producing more than we're using? So Trump and the shale revolution made us self-sufficient. Now we're going back to being dependent upon foreign imports.
That's really unfortunate, especially in a situation where you mentioned before, where we have the Ukrainian war. Then it puts us in a bind when we need the resources that we have here in the United States.
Absolutely. The problem is that the oil industry has tremendous capacity to respond to higher demand, and it's called higher prices. When prices go up, investors will say, hey, I better invest in oil. It's looking really good. But if you've been told that we don't need you anymore and we're going to put you out of business, investors are not rushing to the oil industry and saying, oh, these high prices mean that we want to invest in new production. What they're doing is Wall Street is telling the oil companies, hey, maximize your profits now. Send as much money to us and to shareholders as you can. And because new investment isn't going to pay out over the long term. Why should you invest billions and billions of dollars in new production if the government is going to tell you, no, you can't sell it? So there's a real disconnect here between reality and what the Biden administration is trying to do.
Yeah, that seems to be a common theme with just about any issue these days.
Yes.
So, this isn't the only crisis we're dealing with, the increasing gas prices. There are other shortages going on. Is it just a coincidence that we are facing the high gas prices and other shortages and delays in the whole chain of command?
The higher energy prices, particularly gasoline and diesel, are clearly responsible for a lot of the higher prices throughout the economy, because anything that you use, any material product, has to be transported. And if the price of transport has doubled in terms of the cost of diesel fuel, that's going to raise prices. So every time you get You go to the grocery store, you're buying groceries that have been delivered in many cases from, hundreds or even thousands of miles away. That requires a lot of energy. Secondly, in particular, agriculture is dependent upon fertilizer. The modern agricultural economy uses a lot of ammonia, which is produced primarily from natural gas. So the price of natural gas is at very high right now, and that is causing agriculture production costs to go up. On top of that, Ukraine and Russia are two of the world's largest wheat growers. And I don't know that Ukraine is going to get in much of a crop this year. And we don't know, well, I suppose Russia will, but that shrinking of the supply of wheat is going to cause food price increases and shortages, and potentially in some very poor countries, starvation in the next year or so.
That's really sad. Is there anything domestically that we can do to help that? Or is it something that we just have to ride out until things kind of balance each other out again?
Well, the Biden administration, of course, has taken actions that make the problem worse. We have this thing called the ethanol mandate, the blending mandate to put corn ethanol into our gasoline supplies. And instead of suspending that so that farmers could grow more corn for food and less for fuel, they have actually moved to increase the ethanol mandate on the grounds that it will lower gasoline prices. But if farmers were allowed to grow more corn and more wheat and more soybeans, that could help make up for what's being lost from Ukraine. Instead, a bunch of I forget which association, they wrote a letter to Biden right after the Russia's invasion started and said, we have a lot of land in this country set aside in something called the Conservation Reserve Program, and we aren't farming it. We're just letting it, natural grasses and things take over. If you could take the 4 million acres of prime farmland there among these, I think it's around 16 million acres of that's in the Conservation Reserve Program. If you would let us farm those 4 million acres of prime farmland that have been set aside, and we could then increase our production and respond to the shortage of grain that the Russia-Ukraine situation is causing. The Biden administration immediately said no.
That's terrible.
Well, they're controlled by the preservation movement and the environmental movement. That they only do what is acceptable to the environmentalists.
It's crazy to me how many things are interlocking, or
Yes.
So when I originally started with Eagle Forum, one of the things that I worked on was the use of public lands. And I think that was a one-time deal for me because we deal with a lot of different issues.
Right.
And sometimes a lot of our state leaders have really strong opinions, and they advocate for the federal government to have less control over public lands. But I think, this is something that isn't as popular as, a lot of the social issues or even our like fiscal matters, but it's something to pay attention to because now we're seeing things affect us on a daily basis. And if we got more involved in the issue of public lands and in trade and energy and things like that, maybe we can make a real difference, at least on the gas prices around here. But I think, this conversation, in my opinion, is really eye-opening. Is this something that Congress could step in on to be able to release those lands?
Yes, to release the lands that have been set aside for conservation.
Yeah.
Well, yes, they could. But of course, there would have to be a conservative majority in Congress to do that. So right now, anything, and of course, President Biden could veto what they did, but if they did it as part of an appropriations bill or something as a rider so that President Biden had to sign it. But of course, all that takes time. And when this letter was sent by one of the grain producer associations suggesting that these 4 million acres be released for production, it was still at the beginning of the planting season. But so now we've lost it. We're past the spring planting, so we couldn't do it until next year. So it was really kind of an emergency request that if the Biden administration had been more rational and able to think about the consequences of things, they would have said, yes, we have to do this because otherwise we're risking starvation among poor people in poor countries.
Mm-hmm. Gosh, that's crazy. So, we tackled this issue of gas prices, but there are other, energy related issues going on. What other problems are you seeing come out of the Biden administration?
Oh, the list is too long. I do think that the issue of federal oil and gas production on federal lands and federal offshore areas is one. President Biden said he's doing everything he can to lower gas prices, and yet the Biden administration is going ahead and opposing new oil and gas leases. They're canceled. There was a judge that overturned the sale of a very large tract of the Gulf coast, and that the Trump administration got done right at the end of the Trump administration. And a judge canceled it and said, no, you violated some environmental consideration. And the Biden administration isn't appealing that. So not only are they not putting their new oil and gas leasing out, they're actually going back to the things that Trump tried to do and canceling those. And you see this not only on oil and gas policy on federal lands, but on other things. 27% of the United States is federal land. Most of that's in the West. It has vast resources, particularly hard rock minerals. Now, one of the things that this new electric economy that we're supposedly building is it requires a lot of certain critical minerals. Lots and lots. But the Biden administration is still opposing every new mining project in this country, every major one. And they're succeeding. A lot of them are being canceled. And a mining project takes billions and billions of dollars of investment, and it takes a long, long time to get your money back. So you can make lots of money, but you're not going to do it for many years. You have to get into production, which takes years, and then you have to produce for a number of years. Well, in foreign countries, in Australia or Indonesia or Canada, you can get a major mining project in production in 5 years or so. In this country, it's 15 or 20 years. So why do mining companies do it? Well, for the most part, they don't. And so President Biden says we have to have all these, everybody has to move to electric vehicles, and yet they're still opposing mining projects. The odd part of this is that he's invoked the Defense Production Act to help mining companies with handouts, but they're still opposing mining projects in the legal process or the permitting process. So it's truly goofy, and it's from a national security standpoint. And I think Eagle Forum has always been a leader on national security issues. From a national security standpoint, we became self-sufficient during the Trump administration for oil and natural gas, but now we're going to be dependent upon foreign countries for the critical minerals needed to produce electric vehicles, solar panels, and windmills. Well, where does all this mineral activity occur? Well, it occurs all over the world, but most of these critical minerals are processed in China. So we are becoming and none of them are primarily processed in the United States. So we are becoming dependent. We are trading energy security and independence for mining insecurity and dependence on China, which in my view is just crazy.
Yeah, I know a big plank of Biden's campaign platform was that he wanted America first. He wanted to move away from China, and it sounded very similar to what Trump said during his time in office. But there is a huge difference in the policies that came out of both. So we're not moving away from China. We're actually creating more problems that we are shipping over to China.
Yes, I think this is a very large issue, and I think it should be of concern to Americans.
Yeah, absolutely. So all of this sounds really terrible, but there are things that we can do. We can have a voice in our states, in our federal government. How can we do that? How can we move the needle just a little bit in our favor?
Well, I think, first of all, there is a solution to high gasoline prices, and it's called a recession. And once demand goes down, the price of gasoline will go down. Now, that may not be very good news, but I think as our economy slows down and we move into recession, I think people are going to start to see the consequences of the Biden administration's policies in a very painful way. I assume that pain and anger will be reflected in the elections and in the what the new Congress does starting next January. But of course, the Biden administration still has 2.5 years in office, so we'll have to see. I think one of the problems in looking at, and I know this is a constant concern for you at Eagle Forum, one of the consequences of elections is that the one party gets into power and the other party goes out. One thing that we've seen in the past is that Republicans, when they don't control the presidency, the Republicans in Congress are not very good at leadership, at changing the direction of things. So I think that as the elections approach and the public anger and resentment builds as to these policies, people should insist that, hey, we're not just electing new people, we're not just electing conservatives, we want you to actually do something. And that we'll see whether that actually happens. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen with each election cycle, there are different issues. Some of them are the same throughout the years, but sometimes they take different priorities in different election years. And so maybe because of the situation of the gas prices and shortages and delays, maybe this will be a front runner going into their new time in office, and hopefully we gain that majority and we can put pressure on them to actually do something. So
yes, I don't do elections here at CEI. I don't get involved in elections, but I would say this about policy. The House Minority Leader, Kevin McCarthy, the Republican leader, created a bunch of task forces to come up with a program that the Republicans will pursue if they are the majority next year. And the first task force report has 6 parts. It's on energy and conservation and environment. I forget the name of the task force, but it's basically on energy, climate, conservation, environment. And they brought out the first part of this task force report recently. And there's 5 more parts to come. The first part says, here's what we'll do on energy production. We need to raise energy production. Well, they have no significant ideas at all. It's just tiny little steps that won't really do anything. So if people should be talking to their members of Congress and say, hey, we don't need you to talk about this. We need some real policies that will make a difference, not these kind of tiny baby steps. that Kevin McCarthy's task force is proposing. And I don't know if every task force will be as disappointing as the one on energy and environment, but it's really it's kind of a joke. I mean, I don't know how can you spend that much time and come up with so little.
Yeah, we find that a lot, especially going into the election season. They put out these messaging statements that sound good, but then, you're going to have to put pen to paper and actually make a difference in our local communities. And that takes a lot of time and research and perfect wording.
Right.
And the public buy-in. And so it's not as simple as, saying something very broadly right before an election to get the win. So yeah, I think we're very aware of all that going on, and we want the Republican majority back in Congress, but we also want them to do things. We want them to work, and we want them to push through the policy that we've been advocating all along. So so it should be interesting, especially on all of the energy policy and climate change policy, how that rolls out next year, and if they actually can agree and get something done on it.
Yes.
So this was really enlightening, even for me. I don't work very often on these kind of policies, but they're coming more to our attention that, we need to address them immediately. There's no more sitting on our hands and waiting for, things to get better. So this was a great conversation. I always appreciate your work on this, Myron, and your organization's work as well.
Thank you. And I appreciate working with you and everything you do and everything that Eagle Forum does. It's you have an amazing record over the years.
Oh, thank you. One last thing, how can our listeners follow your efforts?
Well, we have a website, cei.org.
Perfect.
cei.org, and it has our work on a whole range of regulatory issues, not just climate and energy.
Good. Yeah, I looked at it yesterday, and it's so easy to navigate.
Oh, good.
And there are a lot more issues on there that I didn't even know that you guys handled. So
yep. If it's a regulation, we've done something on it. And I thank you. I'm going to pass on your liking our website, because it's quite new, and everybody worked really hard, and of course it costs a lot of money.
So. Oh yeah. Great. Well, thanks again. And we will be sure to send out all of that information. We'll put it in our notes for our podcast, and then we'll put it on social media as well. If you are listening to our podcast, make sure you subscribe and share with your friends. Thank you all for listening. From your house to the State House to the White House, this is Engage with Eagle Forum.